There's so many aspects that's quite fascinating in architecture. I think for me, it's the ability to be part of seeing things grow, both in kind of in society or ambition or vision, but also kind of directly physically. And the thing about architecture is that your dreams, your aspirations, they suddenly become physical at some point. I truly believe that we are building our ambition with society. If we are not doing that, and if we're doing bad buildings, we are showing a bad kind of society, and that's a big issue. I think if you took the component of society out of architecture and it became aesthetics or artistic and only art, I wouldn't work with it at all. I think this combination of having this artistic aspiration or ambition and then the relation to the big issues in life and society, that's what the whole drive is about. And if you remove that component from architecture, it just becomes form or nice space, but it's not really interesting. I think the most important relation of what we're doing in this office is that we insist that there is a relation between what's happening inside the buildings and how they impact the spaces outside. And it's not about making glass facades or transparency as such. It's about that there's truly a dialogue between functionality, life, hopes inside, and it have a kind of impact on the city. And I think if you look at our production, and no matter where it is in different cities, cultures, that is the kind of base quality. I think transparency is kind of a base condition in a democratic society. And in Scandinavia and in Nordic countries, we are so much impacted by this thinking that you have equal access to education, access to jobs, a place to stay or apartment. And that kind of reflects into the architecture. So it's so difficult to separate these qualities from anything. And of course, when you come to different cultures, it kind of follows you. You cannot take it out of it. You can visit another culture, you can be impacted, but somehow your own culture will be brought into it. And it's this merge, this combination that really makes what we're doing. Talking about daylight, today we have a nice spring daylight, and this is, we have differentiation of sun and shade. But in the Nordic countries, we have daylight is a scarce resource. And we are so much concerned about having enough daylight here, so it becomes, again, a kind of a base condition. And funny is, if we work in Saudi Arabia, we're also very concerned about the daylight, but in a different way, of course, because here it's about having daylight coming in, not too much, and especially not getting the heat in, but daylight again becomes a driver of the design. But that's a very Scandinavian approach, because in many of the Arabian countries that would not at all be the driver of it. That would be the shade more than anything else. Well, you can say it's two completely different situations. In the Saudi situation here, we have a warm climate. We have a plus 50 degrees in the summertime. We have strong light, but we have a consistent situation where it's kind of arrives in the morning and leaves in the evening, all pretty much at the same time, small variations. What's important in this building or in Saudi is that you want to have the daylight coming in, but controlled. And you want to be sure that the heat doesn't enter the building. So you have to work with a completely different kind of windows or openings than you would do in Denmark or even in Iceland. The sun travels in this area like this. And it means that the sun, when it entered this angle at west in the evening, when it goes down, it penetrates here, but there's no heat in it anymore. And it's such a little time. It's basically between 15 minutes and a half an hour. So what we see here is that the sunlight hits the building like this. That's why we have the windows deep in with overhang, And that means that the sun is not penetrating the windows, but you get the light, you get the diffused light, because not direct sunlight, but it comes in, it's so strong. And that is, of course, gives a certain character to the building. This project is very much inspired also as a, let's say, as an architectural work by the stelages of the desert. In Saudi we have very heavy rains, and they create kind of rivers in the desert in the winter. And what's left after heavy rain is a situation where you have the hard rock being eroded. And this could be 2 pieces of hard rock. And in Islamic culture, it's always good to refer to nature. Nature plays an extremely strong role in the whole understanding of life. And this is exactly what you see in nature. So all Saudis will know what this refers to. Then this is a big public park area, and behind here we have a financial plaza, which means that this opening here also is the kind of visual connection between a lot of public life and a lot of secured life happening here. If I compare this building to Reykjavik harbor, which is so different, and we have a climate where we have extreme daylight in summer, which means 23, 24 hours of daylight, and in the winter down to like 1 hour, less than 1 hour. We have to accommodate or being able to service this extreme situation with daylight, where this one is more constant. We know pretty much how the sun goes. We also do that here, but in this one we have a winter situation where the building should act as a light beacon, kind of being a focal point in the darkness. And in the summertime, with these very kind of detailed and very much designed facades, we suck in the daylight and use it to fill the building with a certain atmosphere. This one, it's because culturally, this is how you understand it. This is how it becomes a very Saudi building. It refers directly to the desert, which is only 5 kilometers from here. That starts the hard rock desert, the 700-kilometer desert of the center of Saudi Arabia. In Iceland, it's been this playfulness between the rocks of the sea. That was the first vision of it, was like you have a rock in the sea, it's been splashed over by a wave, and this seawater that flies up in the sky will be penetrated by the sun, and that creates all these different colors. So it's like it's also referring to nature, but in a completely different way. And I think in Iceland, people wouldn't think so much about it. They would think that this is architecturally because we wanted this. In Saudi, they understand immediately what this is. Also because the windows are formed like termite cuts or holes into these hard rock things in the desert. So there's always these things that locally informs how you do things. You know, I could never have come up with something like this in another context. It comes out of visiting the desert, understanding what's about, discussing with Saudi people what does it mean when you use nature as a reference. The whole project here, which is very big, 3 million square meters almost, it's called the Leaf. And the leaf in Islamic culture is something extremely positive. It's formed as a leaf. But that was coincidentally because the site was formed like that, because of some big roads. But then we just captured that thing and used it. I think it's about to get people to understand that there's something in their culture that talks about a certain kind of space or certain kind of use of space, and you have to link it to history, but also to aspirations or dreams about what kind of society are you kind of going for, and it's this span we're trying to bridge this with what we're doing in our projects. And it doesn't mean, because that's kind of too ambitious maybe, that we think that each building is changing society, but each project pushes a little bit or comments something or touch base with certain values, and that could be the small push. As much as you are trying to understand and let your work be impacted by local conditions, you cannot forget yourself, and you should not forget yourself, because it's this is this intercultural meeting or way of thinking that when two very different ways of seeing the world meets, that's where something happens. And in architecture, it becomes so obvious that you have to break the code somehow. You have to do it because it becomes physically. And in a discussion, you can go out with two different pictures in your head. What could that be, or impressions of the discussion. So you can say you can show it in a project, but when it's built, it is a kind of a statement. Each project is a kind of a statement of a certain kind of ambition and thinking, anyhow. So that's why if you have architecture without any ambitions and there's no statements, it's quite poor. And of course, we have a lot of these buildings and master plans that are lacking this ambitious level. I think what makes it possible for us to work in different cultures is that we are quite open-minded in our approach, but at the same time we are bringing something to the table. We're bringing in a kind of Nordic mindset, but we're also listening and trying to understand what's going on, and we translate it or transcend it into architecture afterwards. But if you look at our production or our buildings, and yes, right now we have 20 countries or something working in, they are all quite different, and we are quite proud about the difference of the buildings. I think that's so important that we're not doing the same kind of idea just transported to a new place, to a new climate, to a new culture. It's much more about getting out there, invest yourself in it, listen, go back, discuss what are we doing here, test some stuff, trying to build it. I often think about architects as you need to be able to present your ambitions very clearly when you start a project. Trying to say, let's say, what's the three most important things about this project? What should it be about? Which is not the, let's say, spatial or form or aesthetics in it, but it's about what is the content of this project. And often that becomes the driver of how we develop a project. So it's not exporting a certain kind of architectural style. It's a mindset much more than anything else. I think that could be the appealing part of what we're doing. I think the situation of making architecture totally global is a big mistake. You know, that's a disaster, so to speak, and that takes away the whole reason for how you design things or how you understand spaces. Because if you don't acknowledge the cultural impact, the way people use spaces or look at the daylight and either love the climate or fear the climate where we are, then you miss the point. What I think is interesting here is that this global or globalization of architecture gives some architects, us among some, a chance to work in different cultures and bring our culture in there, but at the same time be impacted. I think it would be a disaster if we did a Scandinavian building in Nigeria, where we're building right now. We are doing a building in Nigeria that should be Nigerian, but is heavily influenced by Nordic thinking. And I think that's the whole difference of approach of someone. You know, it's the opposite of the Coca-Cola idea. The nice thing about a Coca-Cola is that it's the same thing all over the world. I don't even drink it, but I know it's the same product. If you did that in architecture, it would be a disaster. I would hate to be in that situation. I think that this being specific is where it becomes interesting. So the regional impact of it, in my mind, becomes much more important than ever, because we have an ability to travel, to have the internet, to look at all projects. So your reference become enormous. In 2 hours, I can surf the whole world for new architecture that happened the last week, or new buildings that have been opened in the last week. In 2 hours, I would know basically anything that's interesting. But it doesn't mean that I'm in Africa or Middle East. It doesn't need to. I need to dig into what's happening here and reflect that in what we're doing. I think it's vital for architecture. And I really disagree with anybody that could think about, you know, I bring a formal expression to any country we come in, and I just adjust it into where we decide the plot, the culture a little bit, but basically it's the same product. I think that could be an artistic approach, but not an architectural approach. There's an endless discussion going on. There's an endless influence of how we are working mindset. It's much more on a conceptual mindset level than on a formal level. So I will hate to stop a team that are trying to do something formally with, you know, they're shaping something and they say it doesn't work because I don't like that shape. That could be later on, but basically if we're developing ideas by making them physical in a model or in a drawing, that's important. But I think it's, this is a question we ask a lot, you know, I don't know if it's the air we're breathing in here or I have to say it is the discussions. It's like, you know, I'm coming to look at that project, which is a project in Greenland, but I've just went for my table from Nigeria right now, and of course, what could these two places have to do with each other? But there is some relation somehow. There's the fundamental humanistic approach to people that doesn't matter if it's in Africa, or Greenland, or Copenhagen that goes in. I think that's important. And I also want to say that is maybe the most significant legacy of Henning Larsen, that it's the mindset he learned us or taught us in these endless discussions also that we're working on. So it's kind of a base and it's developed all the time. And if you look around here, you see how many young people and also how many people from different cultures are in here. That's part of it. We're changing people all the time. I think we're 25 nationalities at the moment in the office, but that's part of it. You become so much more informed by talking to somebody who comes from a completely different culture and see things differently. Good example is we had a discussion about a big project in China, and we were a group sitting here, and we came into this philosophic discussion about how do you mature a city and what is a good city. And after European standard, if a city is like a couple of 100 years, it's getting there somehow. But 200 years is a long time. And then we have this Chinese guy sitting here, and he's very young, he just started in the office, and he's raising his hand saying, but 200 years, we cannot wait in China 200 years. That's 8 generations for me. We need the city now, and what is the problem? And you have to kind of rethink the whole thing. And we came back and say, okay, yeah, of course, we cannot wait 200 years. What is that a crappy approach to have? You know, that's a European idea of a city, but that's not what we are facing out in, let's say, Asia or Africa at the moment. We have to act now. We have to be here right now, do something, because otherwise it's maybe too late, or at least for the people that we are in eye level with, it's way too late when the city should have qualities. So this learning process, this constant learning and being pushed around by new ideas is what's good. But you have to allow, you have to ask questions that opens and not close discussions.